thank you very much to the 4 speakers for coming here today to talk about low traffic neighbourhoods. And the question we're asking is, can they work for everyone? Low traffic neighbourhoods have certainly generated a lot of discussion in the last year or so, particularly as they've been rolled out in various neighbourhoods throughout the country, here in Oxford as well, as many of you will know. But what we want to ask is, can they work for everyone? And can they address some of the challenges that cities are facing today? Are they an effective mechanism? And that might be from a climate change perspective with the Committee on Climate Change, calling for people to use their cars less, or it might be from a health perspective in terms of the Department for Health and Social Care, encouraging active travel, issues around air pollution. So it really is one of those knotty problems. And what we want to ask today is low traffic neighbourhoods, can they work for everyone? Will they address some of these challenges that cities are facing today? So, right, without further ado, I'd really like to welcome the 4 speakers, and we're going to start with Lucy Saunders from Healthy Streets, the Director of Healthy Streets. So, Lucy, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So, to set the scene, we thought it might be useful to talk about how well our streets are meeting everyone's needs at the moment, before we move on to whether a change to how our streets look and feel could help with that. Can we put the first slide up? And to help with this introduction, what we have here are the 10 Healthy Streets indicators. So these are 10 aspects of how it feels to be on street. Each is anchored in a public health evidence base of what human beings need in terms of their experience on streets. I'm just going to go through each of them, and we can have a think about how well we think streets at the moment are serving everyone's needs in terms of these indicators. So I'll start with the pink one, top right, easy to cross. This is referring to how easily people can access the places they need to get to, and it's about being able to physically access those places. So is it easy to cross a busy street, particularly people who've got mobility impairments, people who find it more difficult to judge the speed of oncoming vehicles, or are not as well seen by people driving vehicles, for example, young children. So how easily can people cross streets? But also, do we have the things that we need within a short enough distance for us to be able to get to them easily? And there are a number of groups of people who are saying at the moment, actually, streets are not easy for them to cross. They're having to go out of their way, they're having to wait a long time, it's extremely inconvenient, it's difficult and sometimes impossible for certain people to cross certain streets at certain times. Next up, we have shade and shelter. Shade and shelter are really important for protecting us when we're out on our streets, whether that's walking, cycling or spending time, from the harmful rays of the sun, so protecting fairer skin from sun damage. But also there are a lot of people who, for different reasons, find it difficult to control their body temperature. People who are taking immunosuppressive medications, and there's many of them for many different reasons. Some for cancer treatment, some for autoimmune conditions, all sorts of reasons why different people need to have shade from the sun and a cool enough street environment if they're going to be walking and cycling around. And the UK at the moment is behind other countries and maybe not recognising how much our weather is changing, both in terms of hotter, sunnier weather at some times, but also sudden downpours of rain. And another aspect that we should be thinking about in terms of shade and shelter is also the effect of strong winds and how that can deter or even inhibit certain people from being able to be out on our streets. Places to stop and rest. The thing a lot of people think about when they see this indicator is benches, and benches are certainly part of it. Making sure that we have regular opportunities for people to sit down and rest is not about having a chat and reading a book or having a packed lunch, although it can be. It's for many people about their actual ability to be able to get from one place to another relies on them having somewhere to stop at regular intervals along that journey. So if they are to use public transport, they need to know they can get from their home to the public transport stop with places to stop along the way. And generally in the UK, we are not routinely providing regular opportunities for people to sit down We also need to think about the design of those kinds of features. So do they have backs? Do they have armrests? Can someone who's in a wheelchair sit with someone who's not in a wheelchair at these kinds of seats? There's a lot of thought that needs to go into the design of them, as well as making sure that we actually have them. But places to stop and rest is also about when you're walking along a street or cycling along a street and you need to stop to check where you're going or take off your coat, or because you've just seen someone you know, can you stop in the flow of people and do whatever it is that you want to do? Or is the space for walking or cycling so narrow that you have to just keep moving? And generally we don't have particularly wide pavements in many of our older towns, and our cycle infrastructure is generally not designed with the idea in mind that when people are cycling they do actually sometimes need to stop as well. Not too noisy is referring to the impacts of noise pollution on our health, which I think deserve a lot more research than they've received to date. But we do know that noise impacts our health in terms of our ability to sleep well, children's ability to learn, people's ability to concentrate at work, our stress levels, and there's even links with cardiovascular health as well. People choose to walk and cycle is referring to the huge health benefits of everyday physical activity. So each of us needs to be achieving a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week, which means approximately 20 minutes of walking and cycling a day. I believe at the moment in the UK there's a fairly large chunk of the population, the adult population, who aren't even managing 30 minutes in a week, let alone 20 minutes a day. We're an extremely inactive population, and I understand today Tanni Gray-Thompson was presenting as the head of UK Active on the fact that the idea that the 2012 Olympics was going to result in a huge sporting legacy in Britain has not come to fruition, and actually where we're seeing people actually being active day in and day out throughout their lives is people who are walking and cycling and taking up running as well. And that's partly because these are activities that don't require facilities, that don't cost a lot of extra money, and people can fit them into their daily routine and make it part of their everyday lives. People feel safe is referring to all aspects of safety, so safety from road traffic injury as well as personal safety, and both of these issues are very much live in the news at the moment, making sure that people feel safe. Things to see and do. You might think, what's going to be the link with public health here for things to see and do? It sounds a bit fluffy. We know that if we want to provide a stimulating environment for children to grow up and for us all to be able to find our way around as our mental health might start to fail as we get older, we need to have a distinctive environment that's engaging, that's changing, that piques our curiosity while we're moving around the city. So we do need streets that are interesting and that change throughout the days, weeks and seasons. People feel relaxed captures a lot of those little niggly issues that for some people are mildly annoying and for others mean they can't use the street at all. So let's take the example of a small trip hazard. For a young healthy person who trips on the street, it can be a moment of embarrassment. For an older person, it can mean a broken hip and many months in hospital. Trip hazards are really important and don't get the focus they need, but there's so many other small details in street design that can make streets not feel particularly relaxing for a lot of people, and often we judge streets based on our own experience, and the more we talk to other people and hear about the barriers that they face and the difficulties that they have to overcome each day travelling around, we understand how broad this category is and all the different factors involved. Clean air, I won't dwell on too long. I think there's very good coverage at the moment about the many health impacts of air pollution and the urgent need for us to improve air quality in urban areas. And our final indicator is everyone feels welcome. And I think that's a good one for me to end on and pass on to Rachel, because that's what we're talking about tonight. How can we make sure that our streets are inclusive and welcoming to everyone, that everyone can serve their basic health and daily needs in an environment that we all need to share? Rachel's going to get onto the issue of what actually is a low traffic neighbourhood, but I'd like us just to spend a moment to think, how well do we think our streets are performing at the moment in terms of these basic factors that we all need our streets to deliver for our health and well-being? Thank you.
So next up we have Rachel Lee, who is Policy and Research Coordinator for Living Streets.
Policy and Research Manager at Living Streets, formerly the Pedestrians Association, in case you haven't heard of us. Okay, so we're the national UK charity for everyday walking. That's how we like to describe ourselves. We want walking to be the natural choice for everyday journeys, and our ambition is for people of all ages to be able to enjoy the benefits that walking brings, and for our streets to be fit for walking. So for us, the silver lining of COVID has been that it's reminded people of the value of walking. I think during the first and successive lockdowns, it's been one of the few things that we could do. It was a reason to go outdoors, a chance to greet neighbours, perhaps exchange a smile with a stranger on the way to the shops, or even just an opportunity to enjoy nature. And to be honest with you, COVID's also shown what can be done in a very short time, whether it's widening pavements and creating pedestrian zones in towns and cities to allow for social distancing, whether it's reclaiming parking spaces for outdoor dining or creating a parklet, introducing school streets to prevent congestion and parking at the school gates as schools reopen, or introducing 20-mile-an-hour limits and zones in our towns and cities so that people are at reduced risk when they're out actually in the carriageway trying to keep their distance. And of course, we've seen the creation of low traffic neighbourhoods. So what do we mean by a low traffic neighbourhood? At its simplest, what I'm talking about is the use of barriers such as bollards or planters, as we see in this picture, to create a modal filter and restrict vehicular traffic through traffic in residential streets. So another way might be of thinking about rat running, for instance. But the aim is to establish a network of direct routes for walking and cycling that everyone, whatever their age or ability, can use. And depending on your budget, it can be accompanied by providing generous pavements, seating, cycle storage, planting, safer crossings across busy roads, and so on. Now, I think we can all agree that we want safe spaces for walking and cycling, but the question we're here to address tonight is, are low traffic neighbourhoods for everyone? Now, communication is key. In May last year, Grant Shapps announced £225 million emergency active travel funding to reallocate road space for walking and cycling. It was released in 2 phases to support short-term projects for social distancing in the first tranche, and then longer-term projects in the second tranche. And on the 27th of May last year, councils received their guidance on how to apply for funds. They were given 7 working days to actually submit their applications and develop a programme. And then they were required to actually have these projects up and running within 12 weeks. And I think you'll appreciate that within that time scale, you know, there wasn't time for public consultation. So it wasn't really a surprise that low traffic neighbourhoods deployed during that period caused a lot of problems. At the best of times, people don't like change, and they certainly don't like change happening to them, myself included. And let's face it, in the last 18 months, we've had an awful lot of change and intervention in our private lives. So, not surprisingly, we've had discontent. So where to now? At Living Streets, we believe that communities have to be a part of the solution. Meaningful consultation means that residents' concerns are listened to. Ideally, those concerns would be tested as part of the experimental traffic regulation order, which is used to install a low traffic neighbourhood. So at a 6-monthly review period, you're testing against those concerns. The next 6 months you're testing, and then after 18 months, there's a decision taken on whether or not that LTN should be made permanent or not. But the fact is, we don't always get it right. And it was rather timely that yesterday I received an email from a London borough where we, Living Streets, are actually managing that consultation process. And the person who wrote to us was quite clear that they support safer walking environments, but in their view, an LTN wasn't necessarily the solution for their neighbourhood. And reading between the lines, what it told me was that clearly our support for LTNs was actually excluding some of these voices. So we're actually reviewing that case. In conclusion, I guess what I want to say is that low traffic neighbourhoods are part of a suite of solutions. They're never the only solution. We need to improve public transport options. We do need to reallocate road space away from vehicles for walking and cycling. We need to lower speed limits. We don't need to build in car dependency into our new housing estates and, out-of-town shopping units. At the end of the day, every place is different and there's no one size fits all. So that's my piece.
Thanks very much. And now we call on Patrick Lingwood, who is Active Travel Lead at Oxfordshire County Council.
Thank you. This one here. Good evening, everyone. I've got lots of slides. So this is going to work first. There we are. Oh, it's all in yellow. No? There we are. So there I am. I'm the Active Travel Lead at Oxfordshire County Council, responsible for basically embedding cycling and walking into policies and programmes at the county. I want you to take away 3 points. Basically, the status quo in transport cannot continue. To solve the thing, we need a holistic, multi-pronged approach to travel, which combines both carrots and sticks. And there are benefits, and the benefits are equality and quality of life. Get the users. We've been here before. This is a picture of 1961 traffic in Cornmarket. At that point, really choked with traffic, killing off the city centre. Against probably a lot of protest, the council eventually closed Cornmarket to traffic. In the 1990s, we had another similar situation of general traffic holding up buses, once again choking off the city centre. This time I was there, and yes, there were lots of objections, but eventually the council closed High Street. Oops. In the 2020s, we actually faced bigger challenges. First, we have climate emergency. Second, we've got traffic congestion as Oxford grows, 11,000 new homes. And third, we've got an ongoing public health crisis of obesity, physical inactivity and air pollution. And I just want to emphasise the climate emergency. Everywhere in the world, emissions need to be halved by 2030 to avoid catastrophic temperature changes. If Oxford, a city of learning and culture, cannot do it, I really think nowhere can. And there isn't a quick technical fix. EVs is not going to be the solution, especially in urban areas. They produce carbon as well if you do whole life costing. And this piece of research, and I think it's shown us, cycling is certainly one of the most important solutions for reducing carbon in urban areas. And the County Council already has the policies and the targets to start actually tackling these changes. We have in our draft LTCP, a target of a 25% reduction in car travel by 2030. That is a hugely ambitious target. We also, in the Oxford LCRIP, an approved one, we have a target of a 50% increase in cycling in Oxford by 2030. But to achieve that, to repeat, we need a holistic, multi-pronged approach to travel, which includes carrots, and its encouragement of walking and cycling, and sticks, discouraging car travel. Oops. And here is, in summary, what our policies are. We're connecting Oxford, sitting at the centre, but each of those other parts of the jigsaw are equally important to actually give that whole picture. And LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, are one of those essential elements. And why? Oops. Oh, come on. Why is it not doing it? There we are. Because the choice is between really low or high traffic neighbourhoods. There we have the picture, the number of cars that used to travel through Temple Cowley over 1 hour. That's 1 car every 8 seconds. You cannot encourage walking and cycling if your residential streets have that number of cars passing through them. What's this? Very, come on, do something. There we are. And we have with the evidence, the academic evidence, if you want, that actually LTNs are associated with both increases in cycling and walking, but also lower car ownership. And this is that bottom one, minus 6.7 of low traffic neighbourhoods. And there's lots more academic evidence coming forward. Ooh, no, too much information. And we also have the evidence from Oxford, from our own surveys, that the cycling culture of Oxford actually leads to lower car use and lower car ownership. So this is the car use of cyclists in Oxford compared with car use of cyclists outside Oxford. And if you look at that left-hand graph, basically cyclists in Oxford have 25% lower access and use of cars. So very significant. So it's going to be a long and arduous process, but there are at the end equality and quality of life benefits, some of which you've already heard of. And I just want to leave you one last chart. This is the chart from the Netherlands showing by gender and by age group the percentage of journeys by cycle. So male and female on the right-hand side and the age group on the right-hand side. And if you look at the bottom row, that is children aged 0 to 12. So already they are making 30% of their journeys by cycle, giving children freedom of movement. But then equally, look at the top row, which is equally impressive. People, male and female, over 75, they are still making 20% of their journeys by cycle. What does England look like? Here we have it, the same kind of chart. And I think it's kind of sad to think, if you look at the bottom of England, male teenagers make half the number of cycle journeys as female women over the age of 75 in the Netherlands. And that's over 75, so people, women in their 80s and 90s. So the path from where we are now to where the Netherlands is in cycling culture is going to be long and arduous and probably full of protests on the way, but we really have got to make it. We cannot continue with the status quo. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patrick. It was fascinating. And finally, last but not least, Scott Urban, who is Director of Oxfordshire Liveable Streets and also lecturer here at Oxford.
Thanks very much. You notice I've changed the acronym here to NTN. That stands for normal traffic neighborhood, because that's actually what we're talking about here. Rather than a low traffic neighborhood, we just want normal traffic neighborhoods. That's what one looks like on the right-hand side. I actually took that photo this morning, as opposed to a couple of years ago. That's what Reimers Lane used to look like before this was filtered. Now it's been filtered, meaning it has some of these barriers in it that prevent the through traffic, and that's just one example of what a normal traffic neighborhood looks like. And there's an awful lot of people cycling and walking now as a result. Well, are they for everyone? Now I'm going to use the traditional acronym LTN to avoid confusion. Are they for everyone? Well, judging from these yellow patches, all of which are historic low traffic neighborhoods, they are for everyone, because there is no one currently asking to take out the modal filters that create these several, almost a dozen low traffic neighborhoods in this area of East Oxford. This is the Cowley area. And you'll see what the local authority has done is just fill in the gaps that haven't been filtered. And the blue ones are the ones that actually have been put in on a trial basis. The red one up at the top is proposed. That's the St. Mary's area, low traffic neighborhood. So I think they are for everyone. If you've already happened to be lucky enough to have one, no one's asking for them to be removed. If we think about the journey to LTNs, though, we can't do so without thinking about car dependency. And I think these two graphs just say everything about it. I'll let them sink in. The key thing to know if you can't read it, on the left, the green patch is car, van, and taxi usage. And this is on the x-axis is from 1952 to 2017. Similarly on the right. And of course, cycle use has collapsed as a result of this. There isn't safety and room to cycle the way we've built our streets. So we've created a car-dependent environment for ourselves. And what does that mean? Like on a day-to-day basis, car dependency means jump in the car to go do something, or I'll just pop to the shops in my car. And believe me, I'm guilty of that as well. I don't own a car at the moment, but I certainly understand how convenient it is because we've built for this. So of course, that's what people do. If you build it, they will come. If you build roads to be easier to use, people will use them. And what this graph is showing you is that even under a mile, you have almost close to 20% of journeys being done by car. And if you go up to 2 miles, it's a much, much bigger. So this is what LTNs address. It makes it much more inviting not to use the car to do very, very short journeys. And that's what we've got to achieve. So this car dependency is very deep-seated. Some people like to think of it similarly as smoking. and the smoking ban that was brought in. You know, it was until 2007, it was legal to smoke in the pub. And if you didn't like it, well then tough, you should go drink somewhere else or drink at home. And the point is that there were lots of objections to bringing in the smoking ban. But now we look back and say, well, of course we had to do that. That's just natural. I'm surprised it took so long to do that. So similarly, that's very deep-seated. It's difficult to challenge, but we'll look back and say that it was the right thing to do. Finally, I just want to say, are LTNs for everyone? Well, a key thing, I think Patrick mentioned this as well, is they've got to be done as a mosaic of policies. What you're looking at here is the yellow octagons, or whatever shape that is, are the traffic filters envisaged in the Connecting Oxford plan brought out by the previous council. And my point here is that we do need to look at traffic on the main roads, because if you live on a main road or need to travel on a main road, of course, you don't want the normal traffic neighborhoods to be impacting on you. And it's only right that we have to treat all roads. So what this scheme does is it makes all roads local roads in the way that a normal traffic neighborhood also makes all roads local roads. And just so you know, these purple ones are just showing what it would take to create this sort of segmentation approach in addition to what's envisaged in the Connecting Oxford plan. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much to the four speakers. I think we've had four really complementary approaches there, building on a framework from Lucy through to Rachel's, and then Patrick and Scott's deep dive into what's been going on in Oxford over the last decades and more recently with the LTNs and the proposed Connecting Oxford programme. We'd like to open it now to the floor. We'd love to hear your questions, your comments. And so if anyone would like to address a specific question or a general question to the whole panel, please do so. So any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'll ask a question if I may. I mean, one of the things that's thrown up quite a lot about the problems with the LTNs has been congestion, traffic congestion. And I actually don't really have a clear picture of what's going on in terms of congestion in Oxford. So I'm sorry, this is a local question rather than a national question. It's very difficult to determine. I've ridden around a bit on my bike to see, and sometimes there's congestion, sometimes roads, which I'm told are always congested, are completely free. Sometimes roads are closed for bike races, there's roadworks at various places. We know that bus ridership is well down. And it's possible, I don't know, that the LTN trials are creating congestion as well. But really, I don't have any kind of grip on what is actually happening, whether there is any more congestion than there was before the lockdown. Maybe we've forgotten what it was like, I don't know. So if anybody can fill me in, I guess Patrick is the one probably with most access to the data, but maybe Scott does as well. That would be very helpful to know, because it's a very messy thing. It's difficult to answer that charge that the LTNs are creating congestion.
Certainly. Patrick, I don't know if you'd like to address that question.
Well, there's several answers here. First of all, we are actually undertaking monitoring, but at the moment it's a fairly academic monitoring and having a kind of control sites, and we haven't got the data yet. So I can't tell you for certainty. I will tell you an observation. For the first 2 weeks after the East Oxford LTN went in, there were actually virtually no extra queues. The main roads were quiet. And then as we came out of easing of lockdown, suddenly there were traffic jams. Now, so one sense, it wasn't the LTNs to begin with. It really was people starting the drive again, because for many months they'd been used to people making car journey, they'd been used to free roads, and suddenly everyone was back on the road. Hollow Way, which is one beside one of the LTNs, certainly was very, very congested for a little while. That has actually settled down. So one thing, I think it probably had a marginal impact, but really mostly it's actually the fact there's too much traffic, people getting in their cars, trying to get in Oxford. And there's another factor is basically before, 50% of people coming into Oxford city centre were doing so in buses. And then the number of people in buses has still not basically returned to its normality, because I think people are still reluctant to do it, at least some people are. And I And then I suppose the third thing is data from London. Data from London suggests that congestion on main roads doesn't actually increase as a result of LTNs, but London is a kind of different picture, so you don't necessarily kind of be able to apply that to Oxford. So my general feeling is probably in a first 2 weeks, probably marginally, but actually really it's actually just the number of people trying to get in cars who should be either in public transport or on cycle. But maybe Scott has a...
If I may, yeah, just quickly, just to say that I remember in those initial days after we came out of lockdown, and which coincided with the installation of the LTNs in Cowley area, there were, there's quite a lot of traffic, but I also remember looking at Google Maps every single time there was a discussion about this, say on social media, checking what's happening in Headington, because there are no LTNs in Headington, jam-packed. Same exact red lines on Google saying you're not moving. So if it was LTNs, they were somehow magically having an impact on Headington at the same time. So I just think there's a lot more going on, including people not using buses as much, for valid reasons. And that's part of the reason that LTNs were funded in the first place, because the government anticipated lower bus usage. And Oxford's particularly vulnerable to people not using the bus more, because generally it's a very high bus ridership in this city.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes?
Yes, I'd quite like to ask a question to Patrick and the chap there, please. And I want to know, do you think that this push towards cycling is discriminatory towards older people and people with disabilities? And I noticed what you said about the Netherlands, and that 20% of people over 75 were using their cycles. This part is specific to Oxford. Do you know the demographic makeup of people over 75 in Oxford and people over 65 in Oxford City? The reason is that I've done quite a bit of research on older people, and many people have to be very careful, as I think Lucy said earlier, that they fall over, they can fall over on trip hazards. And I think it might be quite dangerous for some older people to use to cycle, because they have dizziness, they have had strokes, they have probably had some other diseases that render them less capable of riding a bike. Also, I would say that I ride a bike every day, and I am very intimidated by very fast cyclists. I feel quite nervous. In 9 years' time, I will be 80, and I do not want to put myself into a very vulnerable situation. And I know a lot of people also do not like cycling, whether they're 70 or 25. They find it very, they can't balance properly, they have balance problems. And also people with disabilities, as I said earlier. Don't you think they are being excluded with this push towards cycling? Not everybody can cycle. And in my view, that seems quite a discriminatory aspect. And I'd be very pleased if you could answer the demographic question, please.
So I don't have the research on the demographics, but just to come straight to your point, what I would say is what we're trying to do is allow more people to cycle who could cycle and probably would want to if it were safer, and that gives more space on the road for people who can't, or either because of health reasons or because of their trade. So what we're doing is we're creating more space for those who can't cycle. And I would say if someone is having fainting spells or something like that, they probably shouldn't be driving either. So that wouldn't be an alternative either. But that's really the main thing here, is giving more space.
People who can't cycle, and you're trying to get people to be not car dependent, what happens to them?
Well, we're creating more space on the road for people who need to drive. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, you might find it interesting to know that in the Netherlands, in the whole world, the number one satisfied driving population in the world is the Netherlands. And it's probably partly to do with that, is the Netherlands. Has the highest driver satisfaction in the world, drivers in the Netherlands.
I was going to say, what always happens, people forget about walking, the number one form of transport. So most people walk. Most people walk, don't they? So, I mean, it's not just people who cycle who will benefit from lower traffic. People walking do. And the majority of people walk some of the time. And, that connecting to better public transport is the key, we think, for longer journeys. So I think a low traffic neighbourhood is not just good for cycling and those who need to drive, who can't do other journeys, but for walking as well.
Older people who have carers and
Well, sure, because you want to have pavements that are fit for pushing wheelchairs, for mobility scooters, you know, I mean, there's lots of ways of getting around. So yes, why not? I mean, you don't want people stuck at home.
I'm not suggesting why not. I just think sometimes it's practically very difficult, and you can't ignore that fact that if you have older people who are incapacitated for one reason or another, then they will be discriminated against if they cannot use their car.
Couldn't we give them more space? I mean, that's part of the argument here, is we're giving them more space to drive. I take it you're alluding to the fact that they need to drive. So by letting more people cycle, we're giving more space on the road for those who need to drive. That sounds like a win-win to me.
Well, then we'd have to have a look at the demographics then, wouldn't we?
Can I mean, just some facts is both the estimate is about 90% of people can cycle. I mean, so have the physical ability to cycle. In Oxford, 40% of adults currently cycle. Our target is for 60% of adults to cycle, which is the same as in Cambridge, which probably has a similar demographic profile to Oxford. In Netherlands, it's something like 70% of adults cycle. So there's always a percentage of people who will not be cycling. So the challenge is really to alter the kind of low levels of cycling and get that to be much more prevalent, because that actually lets cities breathe in a way. It lets the flow, because cycling takes up very little space. Cars, the real problem of cars is they are very, very space inefficient. So if you build a city on cars, you end up, the Los Angeles. You've got to keep widening roads. There were lovely plans from the 1960s when Oxford could have gone that way. The Armitage inquiry, where there's this, they were going to put a lovely dual carriageway coming to the station. With, I think there's a picture of it going under Ipley Road. So basically, we could have gone that way, could have gone the way that reached America, but we didn't. We went into constricting traffic, reducing traffic. It is true that basically, and then coming back, it is the multi-pronged approach. We have cycling, we have walking, we have bus use, and for those people who need it, we have car use. Together, that is a system that works, which the Dutch have basically done. It's not perfect in Dutch, and we need to head that way. It doesn't discriminate against people who actually need to drive. In fact, as Scott says, in a way, if you've got a system that works, the people who need to drive will not have to sit in very long traffic jams. If you just encourage car use, we will have a continual traffic jam.
How do you know they won't have to sit in very long traffic jams?
Because basically, for two reasons. There was a very, very big piece of research from I've got his name of it, but which looked at basically traffic reduction. And this piece of research, which I'm still just forgetting.
Cairns?
Yes, Cairns and what the main is called, showed that if you reduced the capacity of a system, a road system, you didn't end up with traffic jams. It very quickly settled itself, and actually it could end up going better. So restricting the road capacity actually kind of counterintuitively makes the system work better, because if you promote the alternatives. So that's one thing we know kind of from that research. And then we've got the kind of example of Oxford, High Street closure. We didn't, everyone, if I said, if High Street was open now and I said, we're going to close High Street, you'd say, no, that's just going to be a huge traffic jam. But no, of course, it actually promoted bus use, which is very space efficient. It promoted cycle use, which is very space inefficient. The problem is cars do not work in urban areas because they're very big. We are sitting here, if we're all sitting in a car in this place, well, we wouldn't all fit in. And that's the same for the road system. We cannot continue to promote cars. We have to promote the alternatives, partly because there's such an advantage in driving a car. It's comfortable, it's easy, there's no effort. So it is too easy to start driving cars. We have to kind of equalise the comfort, let's say, by actually penalising car drivers to a certain extent to make the balance better. We have no choice. Oxford will be jam-packed if we don't.
There's a question at the back.
Scott, Thank you so much for your interesting presentations. I have two questions. I'm sorry if you covered something in the beginning because I was late for 5 minutes. So the first one, when we speak about the National Walking Week, Living Streets. So these are national campaigns, if we talk about the week, for example. So are there any specificities of Oxford which make it unique apart from the most obvious ones like cycling? And the second question is about electric scooters, which there are more and more of them in the streets in terms of safety. What are the city council's plans about that? Particularly when students arrive from different countries where different rules of driving exist. Thank you.
We'd like
So
to.
yeah, Living Streets, we run a National Walking Month, and as part of that we have a Walk to School Week. So that's every May, in case anyone didn't know that. Oxford, like many older cities, has a wonderful centre, and I think, you know, what makes it interesting to walk around is the visual interest, essentially. And yeah, I actually went for a walk in the centre of Oxford before coming here because I wanted to have a feel for the place. And I have to say, there's still quite a lot of cars and major boulevards, you know, so for me that Cambridge wins, I'm afraid. But but yes, it's that it's the visual interest that makes a walking environment one that you want to walk in, I think, and having the facilities that you need within walking distance, because 80% of journeys under a mile are walked. You know, that's consistent wherever you live. So if something's within walking distance, people will walk, and that's the kind of way we need to be planning. But just a quick word on e-scooters. Yeah, I mean, it's not the rental ones that are the real problem, actually. It's the privately owned ones. We've got something like 200,000 units sold every year. That's our best estimate. And that's the Bicycle Association, if you want to know where the number comes from. But the private use is illegal, and yet these things have been for sale for a few years now, so there must be about 1 million of them in circulation. There's no way that you can put the lid back on the box now that we've had the trials, and there's no enforcement, of course, and these things are whizzing up on pavements, and if it's privately owned, there's no way of actually managing that. If it's a rental one, you can use, you know, various smartphone wizardries to actually stop them dead when they go up on a pavement and whatnot, but for any other privately owned one, then unless you've got someone there who can say, stop, here's a fine, you know, that's not going to do it. And of course there's an increase in injuries to pedestrians from their use, so we'll see. Yeah.
Actually, would you like to add something?
I'll give a different perspective. But first of all, another specificity about Oxford is actually it's like a bicycle wheel. You have radial routes and a wheel on the outside, and the result of that is basically it maximises traffic congestion because everything comes into that one centre from various radial roads, and that's kind of relatively unusual, in fact. So that's one specific thing about the urban design of Oxford, which is why another reason why we have to promote the alternative car. In terms of e-scooters, in part, you could say this is my fault because I'm the person who put the paper into the to the cabinet member at that point, saying that we should go for this experiment. The reason is e-scooters is another form of micromobility, and kind of in a way we're getting the same things that happened when cyclists first came on in the 1880s and 1890s. People complaining, oh my God, it's so dangerous, these bicycles are over the place, they're disturbing the peace, they're disturbing everything. E-scooters in a way are another form of micromobility, which the alternative would be that many people would be in cars, so they are all really all beneficial. Not if they're on the footway, absolutely not. They should be on the road like bicycles or on cycle paths, but actually they, I think, appeal to a different segment of the market to a certain extent, which cycles don't. They are actually one of the most space efficient, and more space efficient than bicycles, especially some of you can fold them up and take them into your office. In terms of the research, suggests that they're no more dangerous to pedestrians than bicycles are, which is very not dangerous to pedestrians, and that they are no more hazardous than bicycles as well. I mean, obviously this research is based on a relatively low number, so obviously time will tell. I think personally, I dare say they are part of that way forward, because they give people who, like, for instance, don't want bicycles a different way of coming into Oxford in a very space efficient mode. So there will be problems on the way, but imagine if you were just introducing cars, if cars hadn't existed and now suddenly you're introducing cars into the environment. Can you know, where you used to be kind of wandering across the road and then suddenly there'll be cars zooming all over the place. So it's the problem of the new, the shock of the new we're getting at the moment.
Yes, would you like to?
Question for Rachel and Lucy. The LPMs that have been implemented in Oxford were done on a completely bare bones model, so that it's absolutely just motor filters and nothing else. If you have some money, say some transfer or anything, what would you prioritise in terms of additions? You know, continuous footpaths or placemaking or seating, or what features do you think? You know, looking at say what they did more important, what are things they did which provide priority for doing in Cowley?
Do you want me to start? I think it's worth just mentioning a couple of things in terms of these kinds of projects. Making physical changes to streets is so unbelievably expensive. It's hard for me to fathom, and I work in the business of making changes to streets. The smallest thing costs so many tens of thousands of pounds that even at what seems like an extremely generous budget does not get you very far. And part of the reason why low traffic neighbourhoods have been implemented in the way that they have was the need to put something in place at high speed, as Rachel was describing, but also in an affordable way. And the nation at the moment is not awash with cash in the public purse. So I can imagine that all of us could imagine how our own street could meet those 10 Healthy Streets indicators through some beautiful redesign. But the money is not going to be forthcoming. So what we have to look at is how can we deliver the greatest benefit to most people to make streets more welcoming with the budget that's provided to us, which is often very little. And I can see the role of those traffic filters that were introduced in delivering a huge value for money benefit. I worked on 3 neighbourhoods in a rapid response during the COVID, not in Oxford, elsewhere in the country. And we did have some budget to make some other changes to the streets as well. And what I chose to prioritise, thinking about it from a Healthy Streets perspective, was making sure that there were step-free pavements. So often we have private entrances to people's garages and car parks, and at those points there's a step down and then there's a step back up again, which isn't just an issue for people who have mobility impairments, but also anyone who's got wheeled luggage because they're carrying something heavy, anyone who's pushing a pushchair. It makes everyone's journey disrupted and more difficult, and gives you a moment in your travel where you have to stop and assess while you're walking along a pavement whether you're safe to continue. So I see it as a really important thing that, as standard across the whole country, I think we should expect that our footpaths, our pavements, are continuous. But the small changes that we made cost so much money. So I would love to see that across every single street in Oxford, but I know that the kind of money that would be required to deliver it would be absolutely huge, but that would be what I would prioritise.
So so this is not to be confused with things like continuous footway, which I think can be problematic because we don't necessarily have some good examples yet in this country. So
do you want to just explain?
So a continuous footway, gosh, I shouldn't have brought that up, but well, yeah. So actually we're doing a piece of work on this at Living Streets in Scotland at the moment. But a continuous footway is where you have essentially a footway continuing across a side road junction, and it will, through, for example, the use of materials, give the impression that the pavement continues across that side road. But it doesn't necessarily act in the way that actually reduces the car's speed, for instance. So the car may not necessarily understand that pedestrians have the priority, and pedestrians, if you're blind and partially sighted, you might end up going into a continuous footway and not appreciating that you're in a, crossing a junction. So there are issues with that.
But we're talking about two different things here. I'm not talking about side road entrances, which I think need to be carefully designed. I'm just talking about when you're walking along a street that you shouldn't need to step down and step back up again.
So are you thinking about crossovers where the road dips down?
I'm thinking about entrances to people's private driveways where there's no drop curb, there's nothing, there's literally a step down and a step back up again.
Right. So anyway, I think what I would prioritise is just some general maintenance, because what we see is some pavements haven't had any maintenance for 30, 40, 50 or more years. And I think if you have an opportunity in working on an area, it would be actually good just to look at the state of the infrastructure and make sure that the basics are in good condition. Because as Lucy says, there just isn't the money for the full makeover. If you want Waltham Forest, it's expensive. And it looks great. But that's the sort of thing we should be building in right from the start with new developments. And we're not getting that. Let's face it, most developers will go for the cheapest option. And that includes things like level surfaces. And we talk about, say, shared space, inverted commas, but what we're talking about is a level surface where you take away a pavement. And, they might use a different material to indicate what should be a pavement, but actually it just looks like a parking space, and then cars park on it. And then pedestrians end up having to walk into the street. And if you're blind and partially sighted, yet again, that's an issue. Or children, for that matter, they don't understand necessarily, or a pavement with a curb is easier to understand if you're a child than a shared area where you actually need to be able to communicate with the driver meaningfully. So, there's lots of issues that we build in, even now, that cause problems.
Thanks. Yeah, Patrick, would you like to come back on that?
Going back to the kind of cost, the low traffic neighbourhoods is probably one of the most cost efficient ways of actually promoting livability and encouraging walking and cycling. Just to give a context, if we get all the three proposed the two proposed ones and the existing one together, it's going to cost something like £300,000, and that will basically affect 40,000 people in Oxford. It covers that many people. So that is really assuming that what the data shows in terms of livability, air quality, promoting walking and cycling all happen, which I see no reason that they won't. Really, once you start totting up the kind of cost benefit, it's going to be an enormous cost benefit. Our calculation was it was ahead of what's called a benefit cost ratio in the region of about 40. Normally schemes, if they're above 2, become good value. And this is kind of, out of the world cost benefit. And just to also compare in Waltham Forest, where the first LTN, they had lots of money. They had £30 million, so 100 times more money. Once you have £30 million, you can really start doing nice things to a place. You can make the footways nice. You can kind of put nice trees in, seating, everything else. But the core of what we've achieved will be achieved with that £300,000. So if we get them in, and it's quite a long of hurdles to get there, they really will have very good cost benefit. So,
thanks. Just aware of the time, we've got time for one more question. I see you in the front there.
LTMs have been introduced on an experimental basis, and there's an evaluation process. And this is a particular question for Patrick. What would be your criteria for proposing their removal or modification?
Wow, that is very interesting, if that's the final question. We haven't really come to conclusion, and as ultimately it will be the cabinet member who makes the decision, so it won't be me or any officer, it will be the politicians. I suppose the interesting question is if the data suggests that people, there's going to be people, let's say, outside the area who are against it. So to what extent do you weigh the kind of people who are driving through the area against the people who are living in the area? I would say personally the people living in the area would have a much higher value than the people living outside the area, because the main roads are what's meant to be at least you're going by car, how you strategically across Oxford, not these residential roads. That in part is the impact of sat-navs, because from London data, it shows that there's been an increase of traffic in London, and I think 90% of the residential roads have almost increased by 90%, and the main roads haven't changed. So people are basically, you could say, cheating the system by using residential roads as strategic roads. The more interesting debate would be if the data suggests that local people don't support the LTN. Do we value the greater benefit, the long-term benefit over what people kind of think? But then equally then, the national data suggests if you do it via, more scientific, strategic, I'll get my words. When you work out actual, I've got a mental blank. But when you find out the real data by a stratified kind of data, that actually you have two people, you have a kind of a curve like this. People really for it in different lots and people really against it. And really I think what comes down to is, will the people against it shout louder than the people who are really for it? Because the people in the middle are probably shrugging their shoulders and say, oh, well, it's a bit different. So the answer is, we have not worked out an exact criteria to evaluate them, but it will be a balance between, if the local people, we seem to say against it, it will be a balance of, these are the benefits we're pretty sure that will accrue. Do we go against local people's? Well, that's right. I think there's almost about saying we will get what Lucy says, more livable streets. That is just, it happens. You can go and visit Cowley area now, Wymers Lane, Crescent Road, where, in fact, Wymers Lane is a good example. Littlemore Road, Cowley is a good example. We used to have people crying out to have a zebra crossing and to get to the co-op, because this residential road was so horrible to cross. We would have to spend money to get that zebra in, to let people, or even a pelican, to give us. It would be completely pointless now. You can just wander across the road almost blindly because there's so little traffic. So there are lots. We know the benefits. We can see the benefits. So I think all those benefits and the ultimate benefit of that, climate change, we've got to take that seriously, and that's another benefit. And I think I say go back to, if Oxford can't do it, really where else can outside London? Just to give another piece of interesting information, there have been about 84 LTNs in London, and outside London it is Cambridge, Oxford, York, the three university kind of towns, and then a few of the big cities like Leeds and Manchester. So the question is whether, if we can't do it, in a sense it undermines the whole national strategy, I feel, of introducing LTNs. So I really hope that it will come out that we actually end up doing it.
So just like to say thank you to the four speakers, and if you'd like to join me in thanking them.